All right, so what I'm going to do today is talk about what I think is like the one thing that you can do to make objects in a video game look like just that much better. And it's amazing how much of a difference this one little change will make in any object. So what I have here is I have a simple cube in Blender that's going to be a brick wall. And let's get rid of our camera, and we're going to get rid of our light. And we'll go back to Unity here. And just imported that, and we can take the brick wall, and oh my goodness, that is massive, but that's okay. So let's just scale it down here. And then we'll kind of place it on the ground. Actually, you know what? Let's just do this. Let's make a prefab variant out of it. So I'm just going to create a prefab variant out of it, and then it's just to make things a little easier. Okay, so brick wall variant. Love it. Okay. Okay, so now we've got this brick wall variant. And there's a reason why I made it a prefab variant, and that's so that I could scale it down like that, and then apply that scale change. And I'll delete it out of the scene, but then just drop it right back in, and there we go. So now we've got a brick wall, and we've got a first-person character. Actually, it probably needs to be a little bit bigger now that I've done all that. That looks probably pretty good. And I just like it because it's just going to drop it right onto the surface of the the terrain. So that's just nice. So we've got this nice brick wall. It's fantastic. And if I go into Blender, you can see it is exactly what it looks like. And I also have a nice seamless texture that I found online. And we're going to use this seamless texture to create a pretty good looking brick wall without actually having to go in and create every little brick. In a very simple manner. There's, of course, lots of ways to do this, but we're just going to do it in the simplest of manners. So I'm going to close that. So the first thing I'm going to do is in Blender, I need to make sure that my UVs are all set up. So I'm going to go into UV editing, and we see we've got our object here. Blender's already done unwrapping for us, but you see it's not really proportional. And I sometimes I wonder about that. So if I went out here and I hit Control A and I hit All Transforms, which should apply the scaling to it, it doesn't do it. But I bet if I do my own seaming, just like this, Control E, mark my seams. I didn't do that quite correctly. What did I miss? Oh, I missed these two. You'll see that now this is a lot more proportional. You can see that the walls are thinner and so on and so forth. So that's actually a nice little lesson, kind of a side lesson, is that Blender UV unwraps the cubes and the cylinders kind of on its own. But if you've scaled it and you want proportional UV edits, you have to do your own UV editing or your own seaming and then unwrap it again. You can't just hit Control A to apply the transformations. So now we're going to go to shading, and I've got this, and it's got a texture down here. It's just called material. I'll call it brick wall material. And we're just going to do our typical Shift A. We're going to add an image texture here. And we're going to open our seamless brick wall texture. And yeah, that's horrible. So let's go back to our UV editing, and we'll go back to material preview. And so I want to do a couple things here. First things first, I want to rotate it. Hold the Control key so I get a nice 90 degrees. And then I'm actually going to scale it up. And because this is a seamless texture, I can scale it up like this, and I will have the texture will look pretty good. Now, where the seams are, obviously you're sometimes going to have some problems with things not lining up exactly. And I'm not exactly sure why they aren't adding up perfectly. But if I just hit G to grab, I should be able to get them really darn close. And that looks as good as I could expect it. Really, like, the bricks wouldn't be going sideways like this. There's all sorts of things that are kind of wrong with this, but it's going to illustrate our point anyway. So I'm going to hit save, and now I'm going to go back to Unity, and we're going to watch this come in, and holy cow, that really changed things a lot. Wasn't expecting that. So let's just scale it down again. And I'm not going to mess with the thing. We're just going to put it in the ground if we have to. So there we go. And so now our character should be able to just walk around this massive brick wall, and it's kind of boring. You can see in the lighting that it looks very flat. It doesn't really change much. There's not a lot to see. If I go and I rotate it a little bit with my rotate tool here, I'm going to rotate it a little bit this way. Then the light should be striking it in somewhat of a different manner, and it's really not. And so that's, you know, again, kind of frustrating to me because it's not throwing any shadows. There's just nothing that's there. The other thing I'm noticing about this is it squished it, running into all sorts of problems. But again, another kind of a side lesson here. F. So my scaling is kind of messed up because, as you can see, the scaling in the z-axis and the x-axis is different than the scaling in the y. So I'm just going to go my y-axis 0.36. Let's see what happens. 0.36, and now it looks more like my Blender file. So not quite. That must have happened because I hadn't hit apply all transformations before I brought it into Unity. So another little side lesson there. Okay, so let's get back to the task in hand. So now we have our brick wall, which looks kind of boring and has this standard shader that we really can't do. It just doesn't have any lighting effects. So what we need now is a normals map. Now, normals mapping, you make your own normals map. That process can be really complicated or it can be really simple. For today's tutorial, we're just going to go simple. Most of the time, simple will do just fine. Well, maybe I shouldn't say most of the time. A lot of times, simple will do just fine. So what we're going to do is so we're just going to take this, we'll say we can close the Blender now. So I have this online, if you Google online normals generator, you have this normals generator, which is actually really, really cool. And I also have my brick wall in a window right here. And so what I can do is I can take the JPEG that I'm using as my texture and I can drag it right onto the normals map here. And I love the fact that it gives you previews. I used to use a tool called SS Bump. It was an application that you could download onto your desktop, and it didn't give you previews like this. And so this is really great because it shows you how extreme, how big you're making the object. So you can increase the strength, make it a little lower, and just kind of play with the levels a little bit until you see what you like. So, usually right in the middle is actually not a bad place to start. You want it a little sharper, you can drag that to the right, whatever. Once you're ready, you hit download. And it's going to say normalmap.png. So I'm going to go show in folder. There's all my downloads. And I'm just going to, drop that window over here. I'm going to drag that normal map in here, and then I'm going to go into Unity. So I could change its name right now, and I probably should have done that before I dragged it in. but we're going to go into Unity and change its name in Unity. So one of the things you want to do is whenever you've got files, if you want to change their if you want to change the name, once you've dragged it into the assets folder, don't change it in Explorer because that messes things up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this brick. Wow, I really messed that up. Brick wall, and then underscore normal map. And I'm going to select it, and in the inspector, it's going to ask me what type that texture is, and I'm going to set it to a normals map. And then hit apply. And so now all of a sudden you see it goes kind of blue and red, and we can have some fun. So I'm going to go and open up my brick wall variant here, and I've kind of got my brick wall here, and I can click on that, and you'll notice again as I've oftentimes found, it's frustrating. Unity doesn't allow you to change the material that comes in with Blender. So I'm going to make myself a new material here. So we're just going to create a new material. We'll call this brick wall matte. And we're going to drag this material onto our object, which does very little. But now we have this ability to kind of change. So I'm going to take my seamless brick wall texture. I'm going to drag that into the albedo. It looks exactly like it did before, which is rather nice. But now something really cool is going to happen, and I want to do it in the scene. So I'm going to get out here, and we're going to take a look at this, and we see we've got our lighting. I'm going to select my brick wall variant, and now I'm going to take this normals map that I prepared, and I'm going to drag it right into the normals map right there. And now it's almost a little much, but now you can see these little divots and cracks and creases that are in the wall, and I can rotate it, and you can kind of see how the lighting changes. In fact, what's even more fun is to grab my directional light, and I'll change my rotation that way. And you can see the lighting change on this as I change my rotation. Of my distant light here, you can see how the lighting changes on that. It's really cool. So that normals map it's a very, Z doesn't do much. The normals map is a really simple thing to do. Obviously, it was really easy for me to create that. I didn't even give it a lot of thought. You know, if I was really looking for it, maybe the shadows are somewhat a little bit harsh. The other thing is, all my shadows are kind of on the bottom. So what I've done is I've kind of messed up the orientation of the object. Like that looks kind of weird. That I have to fix in my Blender file. So if I open up my Blender file here, I think this will work. I'm pretty sure it will. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to R, and I'm just going to flip everything 180 degrees. And then I have to kind of line things up again. And that's something I probably should have noticed when I was working on it here. But there, now I can kind of create a better look there. Save. Now my shadows are more on the bottom, so I go back to Unity and it should flip around. Yep, because it takes your UV coordinates from the Blender file, and so now my shadows flip around. But it's just super cool how that just adds just that life. I mean, let's do a before and after. So I'm going to take my normals map here and I'm going to delete it. Before, after. And I'm not even dealing with height maps or anything like that. It's just a really major but very simple thing that you can do that just adds texture and life to any object that you bring into your game. So any object that you put into a video game, unless you're doing like a real low poly plastic kind of an idea, should have a normals map on it to create that texture. Now you can create that texture too. It does not have to be with the normals map generator. Once you learn more about normals mapping, you can create your own normals mapping in Photoshop or GIMP, and it becomes a real, it's kind of an art in and of itself to kind of create some of these normals map to push certain areas back, bring other areas forward. It's a really cool it's a really cool process. I'm not very good at it, so I'm not going to demonstrate that, but just know you can open these things in Photoshop and push other areas back and and certain areas forward and so on and so forth once you realize what the different tones actually do on the normals map. So that's actually a really another really cool process that you can get into as well. The other thing that you can also do with this is also change how this works. So if it's super smooth, the texture looks really different. If you make it kind of in the middle, if you go to the smoothness all the way, you see it kind of gets a little shiny, which bricks aren't really shiny, so you probably would not that there. But you can kind of play with these things to again kind of make it look a little bit more like brick. And actually that's a pretty good match right there. That looks really not too shabby. So anyhow, hopefully this just helps you kind of get started with normals maps. I recommend a normals map on any object that you put in a video game. It's just one of those things that just takes that object and just adds that sense of realism to it, especially once you get into lighting and all sorts of different lighting setups in Unity. The normals map is actually really what interacts with the lighting. Whereas your typical albedo map, it's just flat. So even though there are those little texture details in the albedo map, they don't interact with the lighting. So that's where this becomes really important, is to have this interact with the lighting. So hopefully this helped you out a lot. And if it did, give a like. If I missed something or screwed something up, which I probably did, tell me in the comments below. And better yet, hit subscribe to get more Unity videos, other types of videos on graphics, video editing, animation, that sort of stuff. Thanks a lot for watching.